Finland's which one in Sweden? Third countries. Because it's based on what they're saying.
So, what we are starting with today is a unit on, are we ready? Are we ready? Yeah, you are. What we're starting on today is a unit about sort of history of life, evolution of one life form to another, ecology, natural habitat stuff, conservation, climate change, biodiversity. So if you're tired of talking about tiny cellular genetic stuff, you will love this unit. And it's a good one to end on this semester. So today, this lecture is going to be about Darwin. And some of you in the past will have learned a lot about Darwin. Some of you will have learned about Darwin as one of the great destroyers of Christianity. I'll talk about that, whether that's true or not. And his book called The Origin of Species. And this is going to underlie all the rest of the unit on this. So, when did Darwin live generally? How long ago? What?
He was born in
1800s, yeah, I thought you said 800s. 1800s. So kind of around the Age of Enlightenment. And before that time, there were lots of people studying science. Most of the people who studied science back then did it as their hobby. And because they were independently wealthy and science was not a job back then, it was a hobby. And they funded their own research. And back then, people who studied science often called it natural history. So if they were going out into nature and looking at different organisms and writing down how many types of this plant, that plant, observing animal behavior, they called that natural history. And back in those days, people had done good science all through those years, and they knew that there were a lot of different types of life. And that was one of the main areas of research, is to determine how many kinds of animals, insects, mosses, plants, birds are animal. How many kinds can we find and how do we describe what they're like? It was also known that some organisms look more similar to each other than others. So you could sort of see patterns in body plans of plants and animals. And people had already discovered the concept too, that organisms tend to fit well into their environment. What's the point of this picture, you think? It looks like flowers. There's actually an insect right here that is mimicking the flowers that it walks around on. So it's camouflaging. And that's an example of how this insect is really suited to its environment. How does that help it? Helps it survive because it's sort of hiding and maybe a bird won't notice it and eat it, or some other predator. So those aspects of life had already been sort of figured out by the time that Darwin came along. And the other thing that had been happening right around the time that he got started with his work is that fossil hunting had really been booming. People had been discovering fossils for quite a long time and finding rocks that looked like animals. Is this a snake? It's not. Yeah, it's a fossilized shell. It's not really a snake, but the first people that found this, oh, that looks like a snake. It's snake stone. Or finding fossils that didn't match with the animals that they knew to exist today. So that had been going on as well. I also want to draw your attention to this word. Did any of you watch that show, Extant? Show you what I'm talking about. A couple of years ago, there was a TV show. It may have only had season 1. I never did watch it. Anybody see this? Remember it? That's why there was only season 1.
Yeah, probably.
What does that word mean? Huh?
Like,
I wish I knew.
Like it's the unknown stuff.
It's the opposite of,
This isn't my English.
Oh, yeah.
this isn't your English.
The same way.
This is not a special American English word. So this word extant means generally that the organism hasn't become extinct yet. Still on Earth today. So this is an example of an organism that is extinct as far as we know today. We haven't found one around recently. Something that is still extant today is not extinct, it's still around. What's the most ancient organism that you know of that's still around?
What?
Oh yeah, coelacanths, fish, what else? People call them living fossils.
Tortoises?
Tortoises,
Sharks,
White
alligator.
alligators, cockroaches, horseshoe crabs,
Ooh, the stuff that likes the really hot and the really cold. I forget what they're called. Maybe
extremophiles, archaea.
Maybe.
So,
What is that slide?
so up until that time,
No, that's
Darwin, sort of, when he was young, he found himself in an environment where there was a lot of science discovery going on, fossil hunting was booming, people were describing all new kinds of plants and animals and somewhat collecting them if they could. And when he was quite a young man, this is a picture of him at about the time that he started on this journey, he got hired to go along with this ship called the HMS Beagle on an expedition that was going to go around the world and stop at several different places. So here's a drawing of the ship. They started from England, and if you felt like you could trace the arrows, how far they went and what order they went. They went around the world. And he was with the Beagle for multiple number of years. This was a big adventure for him. He was in his 20s, going on this voyage as the naturalist. So they wanted him to go as like a science officer. When he left on this voyage, he was not focused on upending how Christians thought of creation at all. He did not set out to disprove creation or to develop this theory. He was just going along to see life on different continents and to record what he saw. It's important to keep in mind that the huge majority of scientists are doing science. They're not trying to start with a certain agenda. So he went a lot of places. People tend to focus on the Galapagos here, where he made most of his discoveries, but he went a lot of places. The place that became the most famous was the Galapagos. And on the Galapagos Islands, these are islands that are off of the west coast of South America. And the HMS Beagle stopped on both. They stopped here. That's where that little change direction point is. They stopped here, and then they went to the islands, back to back. So here first, then the islands. And Darwin's job, so to speak, was to record as many kinds of life as he could and make notes about it and describe this new plant and animal species. And he noticed, for example, that there were these big iguanas on the land. And there were also these big iguanas in the water out on the islands, and they kind of look the same. They kind of look the same, but the ones in the water were better at swimming, and in fact their bodies seemed to be designed better for swimming than the ones on the land. Like these would not climb in trees, these would not be swimming. So he noticed that there were differences of anatomy, not just with these lizards, but other organisms as well that suited them to their environment. Their differences suited them to their environment. So before I go on to the next thing, well, maybe one more thing. So the iguanas became quite famous from this trip, and also finches. He was looking at finches, which are small, cute birds, in my view. And there were several kinds of finches on the mainland. There were several kinds of finches on the islands. The other thing that is important to note about differences between the mainland and the Galapagos Islands and I want you to write this down before we watch a video for a few minutes next. Any of you been there? Juan, have you been there? Galapagos? It's really expensive to go there now.
Yeah.
But you're maybe closer than the rest of us geographically. What's special about these islands, besides that Darwin made them famous?
Oh, they're isolated.
We're going to talk about that
That's why
too.
nowhere else has kangaroos.
We're going to talk about that too later on. They're geographically isolated. Where did they come from?
They separated from South America.
That's one option. That's not actually where they came from. They're sort of like Hawaii in how they formed. So there were volcanoes under the water, creating rocks gradually that came up above the water. So their origin is volcanic. They didn't drift over from the mainland. They came up after the mainland was there. And that's an important thing to note about them before we watch this video. So because they were volcanic origin, they are newer land than the mainland. They're newer than the mainland. They're much younger. So the mainland is older, the islands, the Galapagos Islands are younger. And that knowledge was also something that Darwin would have been aware of. So here they are out here. Their closest land is over in South America, and there are several islands here that are fairly new when we're talking about formation of land masses. What we're going to do next is to watch a video. It's a really good video about this couple, Peter and Rosemary Grant, that worked on the Galapagos for something like 40 summers. It's amazing. 40 years of work on the Galapagos to try to study these finches. I'm going to stop the video during the video because a video of a video doesn't look good. So for people who are watching this later, go to the slide set, put it on full screen, and click this, and it will take you to the video. The rest of you too, that's how you can get back to the video. You should take notes generally about the video. Take a few notes, and it's about 16 minutes long.